Hi everyone. I decided to make a female cardinal painting using just a few colors. I had the sketch available and I thought it'd be fun to paint this since I didn't get to finish it at my tourista class last night. So I have the Red Lake Madder, I have the Burnt Sienna, the Azo Yellow, and I have some French Ultramarine to create some grays. That's in my palette. Using a size 8 round. This is a good quality brush. It keeps a nice tip. I can actually do pretty much everything with that. Then I have a size 4, also a silver brush. This one I've abused a lot. And then I have a Princeton size 0 to do the eyes and highlights. I'll probably bring in some white paint at the end. I use Paige Martin's Bleed Proof White, or you could use designer gouache. So the red on its own, as you can see, has got a pinkish tint. So I neutralized it with the burnt sienna, so I can go between the two colors to create the subtle colors of the female cardinal. So here we go. I'll try to walk you through it. I've got my board at a very slight angle, like 15 degrees. I've got my outline. The goal is to make this painting fast and loose and simple. I'm just going to wet the breast and a little bit of section right here. I'm going to drop in some yellow. I'm going to work in the tea to honey consistency. You see how it's moving? Seems very soft, and then it gets harder up here. I'm going to do some softness right in here. See how I just drop the paint in and just let it flow, and I'm just pushing it just a little, and I want to kind of capture some of these lines without having to go over and over and over. So just going in with a tip, just pushing it around. Clean my brush off. My other brush has just a little bit of water. I'm just going to diffuse that color out just a bit. Just so I don't have that hard line. I like to keep a portion of the body soft, kind of lost edge. Same thing here. I'm going to just clean that edge up. All I hear in the background is blue jays yelling at each other out there. So I'm just going to wet the back now. And I've got the rose madder. And I'm just going to mix it with some of this burnt sienna. It's a little thin, so I just got to be careful when applying this that it doesn't over push. So the water to pigment ratio is really important at this time. See how I pulled a lot of the liquid out? So I just have pure paint in my brush now. Now I'm just going to make some decisions, and I'm going to follow the lines of the feathers. So if you always paint in the direction that your object is moving in, so look at things in blocks and shapes, and I'm not just laying down a flat color, but I'm moving it in the direction and using my brush and my paint to create the feathers. Just dropping in a little bit more red. I went straight red there just to bring out some of that popping. And I just want to put some right there. Over there it's kind of a beigeish color, so I don't want to go up there yet. I got some reds in here. See, I'm keeping these white pockets. Some people call those windows of white. It's a change variation. And clean off that brush. Let it sit for a minute. I'm going to do a little lifting off, and that's where I come in with a thirsty brush. It's wet, pull the water out. I'm going to create some highlights. And each time I'm wiping off my brush so that I'm not redepositing the color I just pulled off. Alright, just want to clean this up in here. I like the lines that I got there, but I'm not really happy over here. It's a little hard, so I'm going to do some of that shadowing or softening. Okay. Pretty happy with that. Same colors I'm going to put, so if you see the colors here, have a little bit here, and then I'm going to create the head feathers. And I'm just going to create those simple. I'm not going to sit there and try to painstakingly copy each feather. I'm just going to go in and make a couple lines. So I'm just making decisions, and I'm sticking to it. I'm always using my reference so I don't lose track of what I'm doing and get caught up with what's happening on my paper. I'm just kind of, I'll come in and observe my paper later, but right now I just want to use my powers of observation to paint what I see. And that's really what art's about, is just painting what you see. See how I just kind of dropped in? I'm going to pull in a little red, get a couple of reds, because this is kind of on the burnt side. A couple of reds in there. Now I'm going to create a gray after I soften this off. Leave that like that. I'm just going to soften this into here. So the yellow will be underneath, poking through. I'm already really happy at how quick this bird's coming together. Doesn't usually happen this easy for me. But because I got to paint this already a couple times, each time becomes easier, and the decisions are already made because I've made good color decisions, I've made good brush decisions, I have a quality sketch. I'm not trying to just, having a good sketch is important. And like I said, if you don't want to draw, you can always trace. And there's lots of videos explaining how to trace. You can do it on a window, you can do it on a computer screen, you can buy the old school tracing paper. Alright, just gonna let that sit. I'm gonna mix a gray now. I'm gonna use my burnt umber. Sorry, go back. Raw sienna. And I'm gonna mix it with some Prussian blue. I guess I could just go and use Payne's Gray, but I think it's much more interesting to get a variety of grays. And already using the colors that are in my bird versus bringing in a new color. Alright, so somehow I've moved to a smaller brush, so since I've got a smaller brush, I'm going to drop in some of the small shapes. And because I'm working wet on dry, I don't have any big diffusion. If I had wet the bird down completely ahead of time, I would have a lot of diffusion of color. But working on this scale, I find it, as long as you're working pretty quickly, better to work wet on dry. You have more control over your pigment. And if your colors are too fierce, just like that, you can just do a little diffusion out. And you can control how the colors touch each other without them over blending, and especially if you don't have pigment control. Working wet on dry is a good way to get started. but you have to be aware of your edges and you can't let them sit there too long. So just him always doing this softening off. Okay, so I'm going to put some of this gray in here. I am going to do a little wet and wet right here because it's a bigger piece and I don't want to do detail work quite yet. I'm using my bigger brush and I'm really loading it up. So hopefully I can do this all in 1 or 2 moves. Excuse me. Try not to laugh. And this is why I don't do videos with talking. So I want to keep some of this yellow in here, but I want to get some of these lines. So after I clean this up a little bit, I'm going to push some of this color down. I'll show you what I mean by that. See how I'm softening it so it kind of connects? It has like a layer on top. I'm going to clean that up. Still kind of looks like a chicken. And if I make a mistake, I could just change. Right there, my bird shape changed a little, and I just got to keep an eye on it. Okay, so see how these feathers push this way? So I want to make sure my brush pushes that way. I'm just going to do something a little brave here. I'm going to go pretty heavy because I'm going to scrape in. You can use the side of a credit card. You can use the edge of a paint tube. I'm looking around to see what I have handy. And pillow this brown. Okay, so I want to do some of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some scraping to get some of these feathers, to pull up some of this white. Sometimes I use a scraping tool, sometimes I use a credit card. I only happen to have a razor right now. I wouldn't suggest you use a razor unless you get comfortable with your scraping. But because I practiced with it the other day, I was pretty happy with the results I got. So I'm just going to scrape into it. I don't want to over scrape because it's going to pull up the paper. So you see I'm just kind of making these feathers right here that are going to overlap over here. And I don't want to overdo this. I just want to do a few scrapes because this is the texture. It's right here. It's kind of flat. I'm going to mess with that a little bit. Down here, I'm going to put in a strong one. Clean that up. Alright, so we're going to let that sit and dry just a little. I'm going to clean this up a little bit first. Look at the size of my feathers are not big enough. So I'm going to pull some more red. Drop that down. Stretch them out. The scrapes are permanent, so if you make a decision and do some scraping, make sure you know they're there forever and ever and ever. So I'm going to let that sit for a second. I'm going to go in kind of dry. I'm just kind of giving it a little strength. I picked up some more of the red, some more of the burnt umber. I actually put a little bit of the Prussian blue in it. Kind of made a little purple. Cardinals actually have a lot of purple undertones. Okay. So we're going to let this sit and come back and do some details. See you in a bit. Maybe not. Hold on. You know me. I'm never really finished. Just going to soften that. Putting a lot of water in there. I wanted to create an intentional bloom in here. You don't have to do that. Sometimes you just have to look at your painting and see what it needs. And that's why sometimes you'll see me just throw water at it. It might be a little too stiff for my personal liking, but everyone's going to do something different. I'll be back with some clean water and some fresh paint. Okay guys, I'm back. My paper is pretty much dry. Still got a little bit of a buckle, but I'm going to work thicker so I don't have to worry about ruining it so much. So you can see right here with the water, where I threw some water at it, kind of pushed the pigment out, and that kind of helped me develop some of that texture in there, which is pretty exciting. So I'm just come back to finish up some details in here and to darken it up. So you can use any brown, transparent brown. You can use burnt umber. I'm using sepia because I really like sepia. So sepia is kind of an inky color, and it is actually created with a blue and a black color together. I just love it. Originally, I learned this the other day, sepia was the first way to watercolor photos and illustrations, and it was actually, and that's why you hear it often referred to in photography. So sepia was actually, they use squid ink, delicious, isn't it? So it's very nice and sheer. I will show you how sheer it is. Here's my test colors from earlier, so I can pretty much go right over it and just warm everything up. Isn't that nice? There we go. It's one of my favorite pigments. I think I probably overuse it. Then I got some black gouache and some white gouache. Oh, I didn't do the beak. So I'm just going to do the beak real quick. I'm going to cheat a little bit, get it out of the way. I'm going to take a little bit of my azo yellow from before. I've literally just put it on my brush, my tip brush in. Stick that in there. Try to get everything in shot. So I'm looking at the yellow and the red, and I'm going to actually do some color mixing right here. Just drop down some of the yellow, clean that off, pick up some of this red that I still had in the palette, and just look where the red is. Red's real concentrated there, real here. The rest has a lighter color and pigmentation. My yellow is very thick because I went straight from the tube So I'm going to have a very strong color here. And I didn't put my glasses on, so everything looks really fuzzy right now. I saw that they have this new eye drop that's supposed to help with nearsighted. It's kind of fascinating. However, I'm a little nervous about sticking things in my eyes. Alright. So the beak has a turn there. I didn't catch that turn, so I gotta catch that turn by reshaping. Remember, so if your drawing isn't perfect, you could always use your brush. And see how it created that variation just by layering those colors? Pushing it around. Alright, let's just sit on that for a little bit. Maybe I'll adjust it later. Alright, let's warm up this wings and give him eye like her. That was the whole point of this practice. So I lost a lot of color there, and I have zero texture, as you see. So I'm just going to bring some red in here that I still have from earlier. And I'm just going to kind of do some of that bright dry brush work where I take some of the color out and just make sure that I have some texture. I'm trying to paint in a way that you can see my hands. So I'm still learning the best place to position this camera. Pretty happy with the results I got from last time, but being right-handed, I have to be conscious of now of the camera not being able to see through my hand. So I'm just going to really work these colors up. And I really want some of that dark up there, so I need to go a little bolder. And you see that the sepia is very watery. It's a very transparent color, so you could do some really cool things with it. I just want to kind of get that. I don't want to lose my red up there. Lift, lift. Oops, may have gotten crazy there. Oh well, can't change it. Make it part of it, right? Happy with that. Very happy with that. Get some more dark in here. Pretty happy there. That's good. Basically what I'm doing here is it's called glazing, where I'm putting a thin layer of a transparent gold color on top of dry pigment. So it just lets the pigment underneath shine through, but yet gives it more depth and glow. So I didn't pay attention to that, and that was my fault, so I'm going to go in and correct that with some white gouache later. So this should have been saved white, so again, my fault. I should have been more aware of that. I'm pretty happy about the way this bird came out. It's actually a pretty hard bird to paint because red can be very flat, and that's why it shows the female versus the male, because I've done some male ones, but usually they're smaller ones, and those come out okay because you don't have to worry too much about color variations. So it's a skill that I still have to build up. to be able to work with reds. Reds are, to me, I think if I loved red, I would have figured it out by now. Because I don't love it, I don't push myself on that spectrum. I've had some success with some red flowers, but for the most part, doesn't come easy for me. So I'm just dropping in some darks right there. I lost some of my light there. I can fix that by doing some lifting up. Some lines there. Lift up. Redeposit. After I lift up, pull that color off and just clean it on paper towel. So just so you guys know, like at home, I don't use a paper towel. I use an old washcloth that I tear up, and that way I don't have to go through as many paper towels as we do in classes, and it's a little more sustainable. For me, it's a very big financial thing. I throw away so much paper towel, and I use a lot of water, so by using the cloth I can actually keep controlling my brush, and I don't have to worry about it. And when it gets, I could just dry it. And if I really want to make sure my brush is clean, I could just put one piece of paper towel on top of this, and then I can see if my brush is clean in between washes. Alright, I'm going to drop in a little bit more here and there. Look at that. I'm just going to let that bleed up. Isn't that pretty? I'll let that sit there. And let that sit. Pretty happy with that right there. Put a little bit in here.
In 1979, on this day, Margaret Thatcher became Britain's first female Prime Minister. What year did she resign? Was it 1982, 86, 1990, or 1990? 1990. Ashley and I will have a chance
Yep.
to guess at this. Try again.
Agreed.
You'll always remember buying your first car. And buying the starter home. Or whatever this is. But the things that left a lifetime, like happiness, love, and confidence, you can't buy those. But you can invest in them. We believe that your investment should work harder for the future you imagine. And that's where our strategic investing approach comes in. Zero price. Invest with confidence.
Power outages are unpredictable, inconvenient, and disruptive to your life, posing a real threat to your comfort and safety.
This felt a little flat in there.
You have no lights, no refrigeration, no heating or air conditioning. Your well or sump pump won't work. Your modern daily electronics are rendered useless. And what if the power's out for days? Are you prepared?
Okay, it's cold today. So now I'm going in with the black wash, and all that needs is a little water to give it some movement. And I'm just going to add some black highlights. There we go. So gouache is pretty flat, opaque. So using it at the end sparingly is your best bet. If you use it quite a bit, if you use it all the colors, you'll find they're very flat. But it helps me get that dark without having to overmix a lot of colors. Helps me with the eyes. Simple small lines, and because it's thick, I can like layer it on top of wet paint without worrying about it bleeding too much. But you can water it down just a little bit, very little bit, and you can get some really nice marks with it. And if you do it thin, you can still have some transparency. Like I still have some transparency here. So I bought a set of gouache. I've had it forever. I do suggest having it when you've grown, because it does help you regain some of your lights. If you've done like a landscape scene and your yellow flower, you want some yellow flowers, you can pop some yellow flowers on top. White highlights. I don't use all the colors. I find myself just kind of using the yellow, the white, and the black. But I did buy a set that I play around with. It's a Holbein, which is an artist grade. Pretty much happy. So I don't have all this. See, it's got like a white and there's got a lot of texture in there. So I think I need to do a little texture in there. I'm a little nervous about this part. So I'm just going to add that accent. I'm just going to kind of... Alright, so I got some there. Oh well, that's that.
Yeah, I was in the US then, but 1990, I believe. I think you're right. I do believe it is 1990.
Bingo, 1990.
1990. Yeah. Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady, served 3
Her and Reagan are great.
79 to 1990. John
Alright, so we get that. So I missed that section. I always like to throw a little bit of white in it, as I'm famous for losing my whites. One day I will master saving my whites. That's probably one of the hardest things to do, especially with small objects. You have to be so conscious of it, and you have to be so careful. But like I said, everything is fixable. People argue with you it's not. I will say I can fix it. And a little bit of light color in here. Let it blend. A couple of white highlights. I lost this right here. A lot of information here. There's a lot of details on a bird. You can see why it can be intimidating for people. Just a little bit. I'm going to let it kind of sit there for a second, then I'm going to bleed it out. I'm going to put a few more highlights. Oh, look at that. I like that a lot. Drop that in there. Pretty happy with the way this bird came out. It's not an easy bird to paint. So if you take this on, share them. Let me know how you did. Okay, so I'm going to soften that off. I think I'm happy with that. It's got a nice feel for it. It's very loose. I could still add some background on this, some more splashes. Alright, thanks.